fresh off the spring game, talking some Miami football with Cam Underwood from State of the U, breaking things down. So, Cam, it's always a pleasure, and you pretty much went position by position in your latest article, wrapping up the spring game. But before we get to the personnel breakdown, it seems like you're happier with the depth of this football team than you have been in the past.
A little bit. It's always good to be back with you. But the thing with the depth is the quality at the top level across the board is really good. So the specialists, Justin Vogel and Michael Badgley, punter and kicker respectively, the starting 11 on offense. There's a little question on the offensive line, but basically the starting 11 on offense and the starting 11 on defense, that's Miami Hurricane level talent. That's, challenging for ACC championship level talent. Once you get beyond that first 11 on both sides of the ball, it really starts to drop off. The only exception I would say would be defensive line, which really goes 8 or 9 deep. So you can have 2 full lines and then an extra player along the front on the defense. That's the only area where you get to the backup level and, well, them and running back, because we have 4 game-ready running backs. So defensive line and running back, you have depth there where you can sustain an injury, have a guy miss a game or, something like that, and really not have a drop-off to production. At pretty much every other position, once you get past the surface, it's a precipitous drop. From there, you're talking quarterback is the biggest gap in America, I want to say, between starter and backup, from Brad Kaya, who's a top 3 quarterback in America, to, a bunch of, average guys at best right now, even though they, talented recruits, but not game ready in that same kind of a way. And across the board, you look at cornerback, which is a fairly weak position, even at the starting level right now. Safety, average position, and then there's one backup, Jaquan Johnson's doing pretty well. But yeah, the first 11 on both sides, pretty good. That's a team that I can go with. That's a team where I can think in every game we're going to be able to be competitive, no matter who you're playing. Once you start to go below that first 22, that first 11 on either side, things get dicey.
Okay, so I missed it there. The elite talent's there. Then you got a major gap in trying to compete with the elite in college football. But hopefully the injuries don't come and the top guys stay on the field. So, Cam, you have never been one to mince words or not make a point clear, but you really did so at the beginning of your article in regards to Mr. Kaya. So you call him a top 3 quarterback, and I was about to start a debate there, and then I scanned the country very quickly, and I think you're just about right there. Clemson, Ohio State, the other top quarterbacks left. So I think he's right there in the mix. Yeah,
it's one of the things. Yeah, I'm going to stand by my corrected statement from last year that Deshaun Watson is better. I've learned from that last year, but it's not like night and day different between Brad Kaya and Deshaun Watson, even though, again, Watson's better. I'm going to take Brad Kaya over JT Barrett, honestly. The only other guys, that come to mind, maybe a Josh Rosen, who's a year behind, who's going to be an amazing draft pick in the 2018 draft when he's finally draft eligible. But, just going off the top of my head, and and having thought about it the last couple of days, I don't really see, but 2, maybe 3 quarterbacks in America who are better than Brad Kaya.
Cam, when I think Miami running backs these days, I'm thinking Edwards and Yearby, but you've got Mark Walton. You came away from the game yesterday more impressed and just overall.
Yeah, and he's been the number 1 running back in all the drills and rotations through the spring. It's been reported by, all of the beat writers, Palm Beach Post, Miami Herald, South Florida Sun Sentinel, other websites, 24/7, Rivals, things like that, that Mark Walton has been the number 1 guy in all the drills and all the rotations and all of the practices and scrimmages. And that stayed true yesterday at the spring game. He ran the first team, starting running back, and since we have 4 game-ready running backs, Mark Walton, Joseph Yearby, Gus Edwards, and Trayon Gray, you're going to have 2 on the starter team and 2 on the backup team. But he did start with the starters, and he looked impressive against the number 1 defense, which, with the new scheme is playing a lot better with that first 11 out there. He just looks really good. His vision is good, his quickness. He's not taking any wasted steps. He's seeing holes. He's hitting them very quickly. He's always been a very good pass catcher. If you look back to his last year of high school, and I say last year because he was a junior, but he was a year older for his grade, so he ended up reclassifying right before he enrolled. So technically, it was his junior season state championship game. But his last game in high school against in the state championship game, he had a couple one-handed catches, and then he's shaking defenders, and he had 5 total touchdowns. So 3 of those were running. I want to say 2 of those were receiving. So for many, many years, he's been a very good pass catcher. So he can also do that. And he just looks the part. Mark Richt, obviously, at Georgia, his last couple of years has some really, really good running backs there. Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, Todd Gurley, Richard Marshall, that kind of player. He wanted Mark Walton very badly to come to Georgia when he was their head coach. And then, Walton stays home. He goes to Miami. Now, Rick comes down, and he looks around this roster and says, hey, this was a kid that I was recruiting about the hardest of any running back in that class. And now it's like a gift. It's like a recruiting win that the coach comes in and sees one of the best players that he wanted on the roster. Boom, let's ride it. Let's go, because he's more like those Georgia running backs than the other guys. But, yeah, right now I do have him as my solid starter, and I don't really think it's very close.
Cam Underwood joining us from State of the U here on Mark Rogers TV. During the offseason, Cam, you know that we like to rate players. We like to rank them, coaches, and so forth. When we get to the quarterback position, I bring guys on, and they typically try to project statistics and say, well, this guy's the best quarterback in the country because he's going to have the best numbers. I like to rate players based on how good I truly think that they are individually, and then take into consideration the support system around them. So obviously a quarterback can be hampered or helped by the offensive style, the system, the coaching he receives, and obviously the playmakers around him, and the offensive line sometimes difficult to judge. So Kai's statistics probably have not equaled the ability and the performance based on the offensive line play, and you still think there's some work to do there.
Yeah, and in previous years, we played a very, very slow tempo also. On plays per game and things like that, even though our yards per play average was very high when you're running 64 plays a game, as opposed to, a moderate paced offense being in the 80s and a fast pace, Baylor being up over 100. You're talking, if you're getting 7 yards a play, which is about what we've been averaging, you take 20 plays out of the game, that's 140 yards right there. And a lot of that would be passing. So that has been something where his overall numbers are not super eye-shocking, eye-popping, I should say. But, yeah, getting back to your point, the offensive line does have some work to do. Several guys missed time in the spring with injuries. Sonny Adogwu, who was the starting right tackle last year. Nick Linder, who was starting center for a year and a half. Those guys missed time. Also, a couple other players along that line. And just trying to find a good group up front. Tyree St. Louis is a true sophomore who looks like he's going to battle very hard for a starting job. So, he's somebody who stepped up. Danny Isadora is a 5th-year senior out of Cypress Bay High School in Weston, another local South Florida kid. And he won the most improved offensive lineman. And at every turn with Mark Richt or new offensive line coach Stacy Searles, when they were asked, okay, who's been consistent, who's been bringing it to a game-ready level, who's a starting level player on the offensive line, invariably, all the way through spring, it was Danny Isadora. So I think that he's going to have he's a guard, 6'3", 295, I want to say. So maybe a little bit heavier, but I think he's going to have a good year. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle, definitely, again, for the backups. If they have to come in, they really struggled against the backup defensive line because, again, our backup defensive line is almost starter level because we can rotate that top 8 or 9 on defense pretty easily. The backups really did struggle, and a thing that we've been dealing with in Miami for the last couple of years is most of our guys on the offensive line really profile better at guard. So even Trevor Darling, who's starting left tackle, he is an NFL player, but it's at guard. It's definitely not a tackle. He's 6'4", 320 with average arm length. You need long arms to keep those pass rushers at bay, especially, you have long, lean guys, 6'5", 230 who can bend the edge. You need to keep them out away by using your hands. But when your arm length isn't that great, you can't do that. Casey McDermott was a 5-star recruit at tackle, and we moved him finally inside the guard, and he looks like he's doing better there. Would love to do the same thing with Darling, but we don't have anybody else on the roster ready to play left tackle. And that's something that we talked about last year. So there is going to be a little bit of struggle, definitely up front. The offensive line, like I wrote in my article, looked a little bit better in run blocking than pass protection. But there's definitely work to be done and something to be desired from the offensive front.
What's great, Cam, is for the last couple of years I've had you on several times throughout the football season and during the off season, and you prep me for these young players that are emerging. So then I watch the Canes probably 5 or 6 times a year, and I see guys barely hitting the field, and I already know the names and know what to look out for. So what I see in your article here is a couple names that we talked about earlier at the linebacker position that you think might be ready to go.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because the first thing that I started with when I was blogging was recruiting. So, being connected with the high schools and just following that kind of a thing. But Shaq Quarterman and Mike Pinckney, 2 linebackers, they're going to start. They're going to play big minute or, a lot of snaps, I should say, throughout this season. Shaq Quarterman was a U.S. Army All-American. He led that game, the Army All-American game, in tackles. I think he had 7 or 8 tackles in that game and went straight from San Antonio to Coral Gables to enroll at the University of Miami directly after that. He's already worked his way up to the starting middle linebacker position, and he's making all the calls on defense and everything. And one of the bonuses of playing the 4-3 style is this is what high schools in Florida mainly play. So you can get a guy like a Quarterman who started for 3 years in high school, who's been, playing a long time. He's very physically developed. He was a competitive weightlifter, powerlifting up there at his high school for a while. So he's definitely got the physicality. You come into the meeting room and you say, okay, coach, Manny Diaz, defensive coordinator, who's also the linebackers coach. What defense are we running? We run this 4-3. We run it this type of way. Coach, I'm good. I got you. I know this defense because I've been playing it my entire career. Well, we might have different verbiage than you had in high school. All I need to know is your nomenclature, but I know this defense inside and out. So Quarterman was second team middle linebacker for the first week. Jamie Gordonier, who's from New Jersey, ironically, he went to the same high school as Al Golden, Red Bank Catholic. He was running with the first team defense. And then second week from then on, Shaq Quarterman. He was credited with 7 tackles and a sack in the game. That was an incorrect stat notation. I had him closer to 10 or 11 tackles, and that sack was actually a tackle for loss on the first drive of the game. The first team offense went for it on a 4th down, tried to run an off tackle play, and he just kind of scraped outside, beat a block, and met Yearby in the backfield for a tackle for loss on that play, which is definitely a veteran move. He's going to start. I don't think that it's really a question. Michael Pinckney, the other outside linebacker, opposite Jermaine Grace, who's a senior. He's going to be one of the leading tacklers on the team this year on that one side. But Michael Pinckney on the other side, playing weak side backer. He also had a strong game. 5 or 6 tackles. So he's going to be there. And then the other of the third amigos, Zach McLeod, he's actually backing up Grace right now. So that's really, I think, what's keeping 3 starting linebackers from being all freshmen, because we do have a senior at the other slot. So I really think that Quarterman and Pinckney are going to just be set it and forget it starters. They're not perfect. There's going to be growing pains. They're going to make some mistakes, but I think that the defense really came alive with them. And then Zach McLeod is going to be a backup playing rotation snaps, probably as special teams, and ready to step up next year.
Cam, based on what you saw yesterday, more so what you gathered from what's taken place over the last month, what do you think has been significantly accomplished here in the spring?
Significant accomplishments is really evaluating the talent in a new scheme, a scheme that fits them, and just working every day to change the culture of Miami Hurricanes football. And that's something that we talked about when Al Golden was our coach. I know it was, he basically tried to make us into Penn State South or something of that nature, where you're getting a certain talent or a certain caliber of kid or a certain style of player, and instead of tailoring the system to fit the player, you're now trying to put a round peg in a square hole and say, no, you're going to do this, even though you recruited them because they were successful previously doing something else. And just the little things. Attention to detail, I think, has been something that's been a lot greater. There were very few penalties yesterday. And there were some things, a couple contested catches with the defender getting there around the time of the ball. Could go either way, but I saw most of those as clean. I don't think there was one offsides, maybe one holding, and one, I think, face mask. But it wasn't more than 4 or 5 penalties. So, doing those kind of things and just really getting this team to buy into the system. But giving them a system that works for them. So I think that really rebuilding that camaraderie on the team and between the team and the coaches is a big thing. And then outside of football, reconnecting with the community and then the football alumni, that's something that Mark Richt gets intuitively. It's not like, okay, and I'm going to say the name again, Al Golden. He's like, okay, what can I do for this? Or, and I'm just trying to figure it out. Mark Richt gets it. So he's like, cool, we're going to have the alumni social that did the night before the spring game. You had more than 300 former players there. You had 22 former first team All-Americans there. And then at the game, you say, everyone in this room right now is invited to the spring game. And there were more than 200 of them who showed up for the spring game. And as I was looking in the northeast corner of the stadium, and the first half was like 100, and maybe they were outside hanging out, having a drink, having some food. And by the second half, it was 230, 250 people, and the throng just kept growing on that sideline. And that's because Mark Richt has made an effort to connect back with those people. And again, it's kind of like with the recruits that I have talked about. Those people want a reason to come back. We're all, and I say we because I went to and graduated from the University of Miami, we're all Hurricanes. We want to be there. We want to support our alma mater and everything. And you just give us any reason to be there. And I think that's what's going to happen. And I believe that, outside of the football part of it, actually playing, blocking, tackling, those kind of things, which, has been some progression. Reconnecting with those people who have built our program into what it is now was a major thing that we've accomplished over the course of the summer or spring.
And if any program across America can bring back not just former players, but big-time players and big-time players that are young enough to still connect to the current players, Miami's at the top of that list, and nobody's really that close. So that's pretty significant. Yeah, I think that's a great thing right there. Definitely between right now and the first week of August, I'm thinking the most important thing that can possibly happen is that everybody just stays healthy and they're ready to go in August.
Yeah, that's the main thing trying to get through the spring is health. There were a couple of injuries, like I said, that we missed some guys for some time, but a lot of those injuries were actually Stacey Coley was a different one. He actually tweaked a hamstring in not the spring game, but we had a scrimmage last week up at Oxbridge Academy in West Palm Beach. He tweaked a hamstring, so he sat out the spring game. And everybody knows because if you walk, you're using your hamstring. It's just one of those things. So those can linger for a while. So we held him out from that. Hopefully he can recover, be okay with that. Standish Dobard, who's a tight end, he's a senior, but he's probably, third string-ish because the first two tight ends are amazing. But he's been a good player on our team for a few years. He looked like he hurt a left leg during the game. He made a catch on the sideline and then stayed down for a little bit. Got up and was kind of being helped to the sideline, hopping around. I don't know exactly what it was. It looked like, an ankle or a knee because he was not putting any weight on his left leg. But we haven't heard anything else about that since the game. So, hopefully whatever it is not that major of an injury for him and he's able to come back. Yeah, and then just everybody else being healthy and staying healthy. We've had some freak accidents that have happened. Marcus Gayo last year, who was a linebacker from Park Vista High School, he had a neck injury during practice the one day, and it was the day of a coach's teleconference. So like minutes before we were all ready to dial into the teleconference, Miami just sent an email and said, Al Golden can't make it, period. And we're like, what's going on? And there had been something with his wife before with the health issue. So, we're thinking that maybe that's what it was, but it ended up being a player injury issue. And he ended up missing the entire season or the rest of the season from the time of that injury. So, things do happen. It's obviously a collision sport. So, injuries will happen, but we try to have those be minor rather than major. So, yeah, definitely looking hopefully for those guys who have injuries already to recover without surgery or anything like that. And there to be no further injuries throughout the course of the summer when they're doing their conditioning and, OTAs and things like that.
Cam Underwood joining us from State of the U to break down spring practice there at Miami like only he can. Cam, we always appreciate the time, man.
Thanks, Mark. Be good.